Hello friends, today I've got a new tutorial video for you on the topic of high explosive shells. I'll be showing you the vulnerable spots on tanks where you can easily penetrate for full damage with high explosive shells. These areas might not be obvious and your opponents definitely won't expect to take 1000 damage from you head on. And guess what? You can do this even when playing with a heavily armored tank. Not only will you surprise your friends and loved ones, but this knowledge will also come in handy in certain situations during battles. For instance, when you find yourself one-on-one, seemingly with no chance of winning, but then suddenly, with one shot, you send your opponent back to the garage and claim victory. Well, let's get started, but before we dive in, I have a quick tip for you. Hey folks, exciting news for everyone who's live in United States. You have the opportunity to snag a free $100 for any products at the TeamU Market. If you haven't heard, TeamU's the place where you can get just about anything, and the best part is their prices are way lower than other stores. To grab that $100, all you need to do is download the app using my link, or enter the promo code you see on the screen. All the details you can see in the description or pinned comment. Happy shopping and enjoy those sweet deals. Before we start, I want to warn you that if you see your favorite tank in this video, don't get mad at me. Instead, you'll actually know the weak spots of your tank and try to keep them hidden from the enemy. Also, after watching the video, you might feel like using high explosive shells only when you see certain tanks from the video. However, I advise against doing that unless you're confident that you'll hit the right spot. Let's go. Let's start with a tank that's not very obvious, the Action X. How would you react if I told you that you can penetrate its front armor with high explosive shells even with small caliber guns? To do this, you need to shoot just like in the video, right into the commander's turret. Honestly, I was shocked when I learned about this. I mean, such a sturdy tank and it takes high explosive shells right to the front of the turret. But the next tank will surprise you no less. T-26E4, Super Pershing, a heavily armored tank. Even with premium rounds, it's not easy to penetrate. But what about high explosive shells? At first glance, it might seem impossible given all the protective screens on the tank. However, if you aim for this machine gun here, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Because in this easily accessible area, you can easily penetrate with a high explosive shell, and your opponent will be in shock. In the last battle, he played as a heavy tank, and now he's taking 1000 damage head-on from a high explosive shell. Well, there are many more tanks ahead, so stay tuned. Next up, Tier 10 medium tanks, the STB-1 and Object 140. To penetrate the STB-1, you need to shoot at these areas on the hull. I think it's not very obvious, and you probably haven't noticed it in battles, but now you'll know that it's the perfect spot for a half-health penetration. As for the Object 140, it's more straightforward. You need to shoot just like in the video, right into this commander's turret. There's very little armor there, and you can even penetrate it with high explosive shells from a medium tank. Of course, the real challenge is hitting it on the move, but hey, maybe in 1000 battles it will come in handy. Now, one tank you'll find yourself shooting at often is the AMX-50B. Literally, every time I see this tank, I immediately load high explosive shells. Even at a slight angle, you can comfortably penetrate its hull in these areas on both sides. And if you turn a bit more, you can even penetrate its sides. But there's another area on its turret. I'm sure you didn't know this. If you shoot at this spot near the gun, high explosive shells will also go in without much trouble. How challenging it must be for you to survive in battles. There's another heavy tank with survival issues, the IS-2H. You might have seen this tank in my recent video, Blitz Bastards. There I mentioned that this tank has simply dreadful armor. But as it turns out, it can also be penetrated with high explosive shells right into the front of the hull. In this area, straight into the viewport, there's absolutely no armor. This just confirms the fact that the tank is just terrible. And now let's jump back to Tier 10, straight to the T-110E3. Undoubtedly, the armor of this tank is impressive. It's very difficult to penetrate its front even with premium rounds, but what about high explosive shells? If you shoot into the viewport, just like in the video, the enemy will be in shock, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. Just imagine their surprise while playing one of the most armored tanks in the game in one of the battles, taking a direct hit to the front with a high explosive shell. And here's another tank destroyer for you, the JPanther 2. Here, you can penetrate with a high explosive shell right into the machine gun for full damage. Considering that the tank has relatively few hit points, you're guaranteed to leave it with just one shot or even take it out in a single shot if you're lucky. And here's how to penetrate the Gravedigger with a high explosive shell right into the turret. All you need to do is hit its commander's turret, and the high explosive shell will be successfully executed. I discovered this purely by accident when playing with the Smasher. Out of curiosity, I shot into its turret and was shocked to see the high explosive shell deal a little over 1000 damage. Now you'll know about it too. So let's move on. Now let's talk about Tier 10 heavy tanks. First, take a look at how to penetrate the Chieftain MK6. Again, there's a vulnerable area in the commander's turret. Playing with something like the E100, you can easily penetrate here without any issues. The key is just to get used to it. As for the E100, you can penetrate this flat area on its turret, but only with a large caliber gun, for example on the FV-4202. However, if the E100 is facing away from you and you're slightly elevated, you can penetrate the same flat area, but from behind. In this case, you don't even need a large caliber. Something like the VK7201 can penetrate this region. And the VK9001P can be easily penetrated right here using HESH high explosive shells while playing something like the FV-4202. You can easily penetrate it in this thin strip. It's quite surprising for the supposedly most armored heavy tank in the game. Now, tank that I definitely didn't expect to penetrate with a high explosive shell to the front is the T-30 and T-34. Both of these tanks share the same hull, and in the front of this hull, there's a hole in the armor. High explosive shells can easily go in there for full damage. I think it's just incredible. Well, friends, this video has come to an end. If you've learned something new, be sure to like and leave comments. It's a big motivation for creating new videos for you. I have many more ideas for educational content, and it all depends on you. Until next time, friends, goodbye.